What's going on YouTube? This is Andre from Card Games United, presenting a Nova Grappler Perfect Raizer deck for Standard, the new format. Standard's honestly very fun. I've been enjoying the format, and I've been putzing around with Nova Grapplers. I recently took this to the first locals I've ever played for Standard. Went 3-1, only loss being Oracle Think Tank, because screw Oracle.
Because oracles are the best. Oh, by the way, I'm like, hi.
Overall, this is the after a lot of playtesting, this is the build I've decided to go with. It's still under change as I test this out a little more and just keep playing with it. But so far, it's been doing well. After a rough start on the channel, as you see. So
if you had to just give some quick first impressions on Nova's place in the meta, strengths and weaknesses, that kind of thing,
I would say, based on numbers, I think it's unfortunately the worst performing clan actually out there. But that doesn't mean it's a bad deck. This deck in particular is perfectly capable of topping, but the thing is that it's very difficult to pilot. So you really have to think about things like how to calculate when opponents will get certain triggers, and how to play around those triggers a lot. How to efficiently use your Excel circles, like what units work best in the Excel circles. Force clans are also interesting to play around because you have to play around the higher bases, which can be a little bit of a pain. But when the deck does go off, it goes off. It's very difficult to deal with this deck when it's able to get the perfect setup. It's just not all that often that it will get there. But while I may say that technically it may be the worst clan in the meta, it's still capable of getting tops.
Would you say it's the worst deck, or would you say the meta just affects it negatively?
The meta just affects it negatively. This deck has a lot of potential, maybe as more clans come in. It's just right now with Kagero being a little bit of a tough matchup, considering that they can retire units in about... and just rolls having those 13k bodies just makes it a bit difficult, but this does have a decent matchup against OTT.
So, if we go ahead and throw in the three from Destructive Roar, Tachikaze, Spike Brothers, and Mega Colony, where do you think it fits in the 6 clans we know about right now? Just prospectively.
I'd probably say it's on par with Royals. It might be able to do some damage against Mega Colony, potentially. But I think Spike Brothers and I think Tachikaze will probably be able to get it. As well as the other two clans, Kagero and OTT right now. But it'll still be viable as Destructive War comes. But I have a feeling the Aqua Force support's going to be really good, so a lot of Nova players will probably drop this to go play Aqua Force. But for now, this deck is still respectable.
Okay. So let's get into the deck build.
Well, first we'll start off with 8 Excel markers.
You didn't need to show them that.
You can play as many as you want. I just wanted to show off the Kamui markers. It's cool. So this is my starter. It's Battle Raizer. You actually do because you actually need to play this card for a certain grade 2 that I will show you later. So you need to play Battle Raizer, even though
Does it also affect your grade 3s?
Yeah, actually it does.
Interesting.
Because it has Raizer.
Something.
It has Raizer in the name. 4 Perfect Raizers. This card actually shot up from like $8 when I got this playset to like now it's 22. This actually isn't that much of a staple as you think. Just because this card has a few weaknesses in that it being Counterblast 2 means that if your opponent's smart enough, they can sort of play around this thing.
Well, what else would you play if not that?
I guess you could play a Surikaiser if you wanted to go that route, but...
Because he just guarantees 2 stands, whereas the Surikaiser has
yeah,
luck.
And he also has an on-hit effect, which doesn't actually require it to hit the Vanguard. You can just hit a rearguard, so if you're going up against like a Force clan like Kagero and they retired your Battle Raizer, you can attack one of their rearguards and still have the possibility of getting the effect. The effect also does countercharge, but it's not very reliable. But when it does hit, the plus 5k can be a little bit useful for calculating like if the opponent hits a trigger. Because since the second effect happens at the end of the battle, if the opponent checks a trigger, then you can sort of use that then to evaluate where the 5k goes. But this first attack only is when it attacks. Unfortunately, it's not like Alexander's is at the end of the battle, so there is the risk that if you do use the skill and then the opponent hits a trigger, some of your units or all of them may not be able to hit.
The counterblast.
Yep. So you have to be careful as to when you use this card. But it's the Vanguard you want to be on at almost all times. Backup grade 3 is Battledore Fighter.
So, my first thought when I saw this is, why not Sharkizer? So,
first of all, a Sharkizer is very RNG reliant. It's kind of bad just to have a Vanguard where you need to check either a grade 2 or a grade 3 to be able to stand something. And it can make your battle formations a little bit weird because you have to attack with at least maybe 1 or 2 units first. And then that can be a little problematic if you check triggers, because then you might not be able to apply as many trigger effects as you want. Say if you're on, Perfect Raizer, because he's a guarantee stand. So triggers can sometimes be wasted on a Sharkizer. The difference is that Battledore Fighter has a rearguard skill that's actually pretty useful, especially against Force Clans, where if you have 3 or more units and he attacks on the Vanguard or the rearguard circle, he gets 5k. So it can hit Force Clans by itself, whereas a Sharkizer doesn't have a rearguard skill. And he does have a skill in the Vanguard, so if you do ride this thing, you do get an Excel marker, and you do have the skill where you can counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, choose one of your units, and your opponent has to throw 2 cards down to guard. So it basically being able to do something on the Vanguard and it being able to also be a rearguard kind of makes it the perfect backup grade 3 in this deck. A Sharkizer can be a 1 of or 2 of tech if you went up to 9 grade 3s. Just because there are situations where you want to counterblast and you kind of want to be in a Sharkizer, but I haven't been watching a Sharkizer in any of the matches I've had so far with this deck so far. I guess another honorable consideration is Maximum Raizer. It's a very good beat stick. I've thought about teching in at 1 or 2, but I think 8 grade 3s is perfect, and I think this is perfect for since it has a rearguard skill anyways.
The Vanguard skill makes the difference there, because
yeah. Get an Excel marker versus riding Maximum Raizer and not getting the Excel marker. And this is still 5k even on the Vanguard circle versus the 10k you get. So this is going to be 27k in the Excel circle.
It's mostly about the marker then?
Yep. Marker and ride consistency. Grade 2s. This card actually isn't as good as you think, even though it's a 4 of and a double R. High Power Raizer Custom, when you ride him, you can call a Battle Raizer the same column as him, and then if he hits on the Vanguard or rearguard circle, you can counterblast 1, put that Battle Raizer into hold, stand something.
I always thought the value of this more came from getting the Battle Raizer than the stand effect.
That's why he's running as a 4 because he's for your perfect ride target. You want to be riding him to get that Battle Raizer as a booster because
that means you go 15, 18.
Yep, 18, so it's a... First of all, it means
even if you're up against a Force Clan and they ride 10, you're swinging at them for 15 instead of 9, and they ride 13,
and then your
swinging at them
Perfect
for 18
Raizer will be able to hit for 18. I mean, against Kagero, it's a little bit less useful just because they can retire the Raizer. But like I said, just being able to get it once is important for Force Clans. No one's ever going to...
probably mention just how bad the Kagero matchup is for this.
But just because he's such a good ride is why you want to run 4 of him. No one ever lets this thing hit, so it does have on-hit pressure, though it does force cards from the opponent's hand. If they do let it hit, well, you get to recycle that Raizer, and I guess you get to call it again and get the Raizer back.
So just how bad on a scale of 1 to 10 is the Kagero matchup?
7. It's not unwinnable, but it's difficult. That's for sure.
Okay.
4 Burst Raizers. I saw some guy who was like, you shouldn't run this card at all.
What's up, Soul Blast?
Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, you stand him when your Vanguard attacks. He gets 3k if you have 4 or more damage. So you get 3k if you have 4 or more. If your opponent has 4 or more cards in the damage
zone. So the
zone.
idea is he can dig at a non-Force Clan by himself, even if he's not on the Excel circle.
Yeah.
And if he is on the Excel circle, he forces.
I mean, like, the guy that said that you shouldn't run this card at all was like, but you get so many attacks anyway, so there are other grade 2s. But sometimes
you don't get that many attacks.
Sometimes you will be on like a Battledore Fighter. So you do need some other way to get multi-attacking besides Excel circles, and this provides it. It's also the perfect target for Battledore Fighter.
And without him, you max out at 5 attacks a turn.
Yeah. He's also really good in Excel circle because he's 19k. And even if your opponent does check a trigger, most likely it'll still be able to swing at a rearguard. So...
I want to see that dude stack. I bet he's running some wacky tobacco.
Yeah, like, you run this at 4, there's no question asked.
This seems staple to me.
You run this at 4, there's no questions asked. It can even be used in early game for some rush.
Yeah, it doesn't require grade 3.
Only thing I will mention, and this is something I saw my mistake with another person, is that if this is your Vanguard and this is your rearguard, because of the timing on these things, before your opponent declares any guard whatsoever, you have to declare whether you're using this skill or not.
Right, because it's on attack.
Yeah, because I saw someone at my locals just be like, attack, doesn't hit, after they guarded, and then use the skill. Which is not the timing of it. So it's either one or the other.
Well, technically you could use both, it's just
Yep.
the other one wouldn't do much. Anyway.
But, staple at 4.
Staple at 4.
Next is 3 Iron Killers. Very important card, because it gains 5k when when you have 3 or more rearguards when it attacks a Vanguard.
Also, it has one of the best names in Vanguard.
Yeah.
Iron Killer.
Important to hit Force Glance. On an Excel circle, it can be 24k, which covers for a trigger. On your Raizer turn, so it's a good restand target for Perfect Raizer.
I'm just picturing him getting an evolved, like, grade 3 version Iron Killer McEdgelord.
I hope they do that.
It's just the same dude, but he's in, like, a high school class.
2 Boomerang Throwers, you could certainly bump this up to 3 or even 4, but I think 2 is a perfect number just because it only works when you have 1 or less face-up cards in damage zone, and when you have 1 or less cards in the soul, but it's an important resource recharger for a deck that goes through it pretty easily, and needs it. But hey, it got more...
Is there any other grade 2 you would consider in this spot if you weren't running him?
Maybe Extra Muscular, just because it gains 3k every time it stands.
Also big.
You could also probably run an extra one of this to go up to 4. But you want to be running this card at least at 2. Unless if you're playing like that weird hero build, then you probably don't run this card. Actually, no, you run this card anyways. Next up, we have 4 Raizer Customs. Seen some Japanese lists run too, but I kind of disagree with it.
Actually, I kind of don't, because I don't think this card's Vanguard skill should ever be used.
I didn't use it at all at the locals I went 3-1 with this deck with, actually. Maybe once, but most likely 0.
Right, because the idea of putting away a card in a deck that relies so heavily on resources and doesn't generate them very fast is kind of insane.
Yeah. You mostly use it for the second skill just because it's so convenient.
And because he can't boost an Excel circle, that means that he's kind of mitigated to only these spots.
He's good for the early game just because, like, if your high power Raizer custom hits, he can also restand with the unit that does restand, or like if you're Burst Raizer.
I could very much see him being run at 3-2.
It depends on the grade 1 you'd probably want to be running. Like, you could run the one that looks like Kamui, the one for heroes, that one that gains like 3k if you have to boost a hero. Or if you want to run that 9k vanilla, that's perfectly fine.
Oh, you mean Rocket Hammer?
Yeah. Or you can run the 9k vanilla. But I don't value those cards too much since we're not running heroes, and I don't like the 9k vanilla. So you might as well run this at 4, considering the limited options we have for grade 1s. I guess alternatively you could maybe run 11 grade 1s and go for an extra grade 3 or 2, but I like 4 of this.
It might be worth it to cut 1 and go to 9 grade 3s if you're playing a Shurinkaiser.
Yeah, that could be an option. Next... Now this card's actually really good. Jet Raizer. 4 Jet Raizer. Super good guard. Every time a rearguard is placed, he gains 3k. It also works on the Vanguard and rearguard circle. So this thing can just get really big just for the act of calling. If you call twice, he can hit a Force Clan on its own. Yeah, this card's definitely a staple at 4.
One thing that's a little inconvenient about him is he's a 7.
Yeah, so if you do have to ride him and you're going second and you don't want to call down a booster, it can be a little bit obnoxious. But other than that, he's very important for the deck. Gets very big. Finally, for Trans Raizer.
So I'm interested. How often do you think you use this effect?
Actually, I used it a decent amount at the local tournament I went to. Just because like people would try to damage 9-me on Perfect Raizer so much that I would just have to throw this thing down and attack with something boost with it to get the 2 counterblast for Raizer.
But do you ever use it like more than once per game?
No.
Because that 2 Soul Blast seems heavy.
Never more than once per game, and you also want to have at least 1 Raizer in Soul for Perfect Raizer so you can get the skill off. But it is something you will, if you're playing this deck, you will have to use it at least once.
Okay.
Also, it gains 3k.
Also, it gains 3k.
Trigger lineup.
11. So I guess that's for. I don't know who that's for.
8 front triggers.
Oh, it may be for what's his face. anything that hits for 12.
Mm-hmm. 8 and front triggers. So there's a little bit of explaining I have to do with this one because it is... You could honestly go a lot of different...
You might as well go ahead and show the whole trigger lineup because I think everyone's guessing it at this point.
Yeah. 4 draws, 4 heals.
So let's just go ahead and put aside the heals and the PGs because obviously you're going to run
you want to be running
you're
these.
Gonna run PGs. So you have 8 8 front triggers and no crits.
Yeah.
Do you find that ever affects your pressure in mid-game? Ever affects your ability to close?
So the reason I choose front triggers over crit triggers is because the front triggers provide a lot more value compared to the critical triggers. Because if you check a front trigger, it's on average it's 10k, maybe 2 to 3 units versus the critical trigger that only affects 1 unit. The front triggers, when you check them, guarantee that if your opponent does damage check a trigger, then your units will be able to cover for it because they're also gaining 10k. It's also pretty cool when it's 2 to pass, and if you do check a front trigger, you don't have to worry about making the decision as to whether to go all in on the Vanguard, which is what a crit trigger would do, because obviously the front trigger automatically applies 10k to your Vanguard, which means then you can check something like a draw trigger or another front trigger and break through. So with the front trigger, you don't have to have that sort of trade-off between making a decision as to whether or not you give power to your Vanguard and go all in, or to play it safe and go for a rear guard. The only thing is, I think, in major tournaments, or as people around locals would get to know me a little more, they may be more apt to take the Vanguard attacks because they know I don't run any criticals. So maybe I put in like 7 front triggers and just run the 1 critical trigger just to mess with people.
That makes sense.
But like, the interesting thing about Novas is you get to go almost anywhere with the trigger lineup. I've seen some Raizer decks honestly run 8 criticals, 4 draws, 6 draws, 6 criticals, which in a lot of the early games with this deck I was running. I didn't like it because I wasn't seeing the front triggers as much as I would want to, so I just said go all in on the front triggers.
So the issue back when it was stands was always you had to get to late game for it to really matter.
Yeah.
So I would think in a deck this resource intensive that gambling on getting to late game wouldn't be the best idea. Do you ever feel that issue?
Sometimes, which is kind of why you could go to about 2 crit 6 front triggers. But I mean, even in late game, if you do check one of these...
Well, because obviously in late game it's going to be more effective when I have to guard all your attacks, making all those attacks bigger.
But even early game, defensively, these front triggers are amazing. I threw some people for a loop because I would just check one and their entire turn would basically have to get ended, even though they had units on the board that could attack because it was 10k to the front row defensively.
They can't take it rear guards anymore.
Yep. So, I mean, it depends. When Novas go off, you don't need the critical triggers because you get so many attacks. And the crits could even be bad if they do damage check 2 triggers, which you give them the opportunity to do. But it depends.
I think I've talked about it before, and I think one of the really big, I guess you could call it a problem with Nova Grappler right now, is that they rely so much on high rolling.
Yeah, they need to go first. It's one thing I noticed.
Yeah, but just also that, but just general high rolling, getting your exact right pieces in the exact right order.
Yeah, because like...
So, some people might resist that with some crit triggers, but you appear to have leaned into it.
These front triggers came in well for that local tournament. I mean,
because
again...
If you do get that high roll, obviously, and make it to late game, the front triggers become invaluable. So I get you just sort of doubled down, like let's make Nova as Nova-y as possible.
Basically, just to basically make sure that we can say no to triggers so many times, because there's one thing about this deck that I noticed. Remember old Aquaforce before Alexandros, where like a trigger could sledge on a churn? This is kind of the same symptom. It's Aquaforce symptom, where if you don't have your attack patterns right, and your opponent does damage check a trigger, oftentimes entire turns could be shut down.
But with the front trigger, you don't have to rely
You might get the risk of that. That risk still exists, But at least checking this, you definitely mitigate it.
Because it effectively nullifies it for all your units
Yeah.
and not just
I mean,
one.
obviously they could then still take the next hit, and that could still be a trigger. But it does guarantee you at least one more damage, or it guarantees you the same amount of damage the critical trigger would have applied. Or if they guard it, it guarantees that you got cards out of their hands.
Alright, well, I think we've given the audience enough to chew on with that.
Overall, this deck is fun. I do have fun playing it. I'm not saying that this deck is great, because the sample size is obviously small with how much I've played, so a lot of it can still change depending on, like, how I do.
Are there any points you think are definitely going to change, that are more suspect, anything you'd like to see them shore up in future releases, things like that?
Resource management. Because if you're going to have Perfect Raizer being your main grade 3, and Perfect Raizer is a very powerful card, it's just very easy for the opponent to play around. And in competitive play where they will damage deny you if needed, Nova Grapplers need a more efficient way to resource recharge. For what we have right now, it's workable, but I would just like to see more of that. It would just make the deck a lot more consistent.
Do you think it would be best in the grade 1 spot, grade 2, grade 3?
I would probably say the grade 3 spot.
The grade 3 spot?
Just because I think Battledore Fighter is the most replaceable card in right now. You could also probably make it the grade 1 spot, because like high-powered Raizer Custom isn't that good. And honestly, even the grade 2, because we don't like high-powered Raizer Custom, or we don't like, what's his name again? Double R grade 1. Raizer Custom, yeah. Those cards can certainly, I think, be replaced in the future for more resource recharges. I'd also ask for some kind of draw engine, but we don't want this to become G or Nova Grappler with Victor. You know, which every clan did everything, so I don't know. Mostly,
Victor.
yeah. But
oh my stars. Well, this has been Team Card Games United. Any final thoughts?
If you're playing against Kagero, you might want to time. You have to know when to play certain things and when to go all out. That's your trick to playing against them. It takes a lot of practice. But if you can get that matchup right, then you can do pretty well with this deck.
Alright. Peace.